just in case anyone.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good. Thank you for checking. Okay. I'm super, super excited that we get to have this conversation, but I'm still going to start my phone, and I've got 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So this will ring. You'll hear it. So Alice, Hamish, and Nabeel, they're here from the city, and we are so grateful that they're here. Hi, and who else is here with Alice? We've got, like, there's a privacy, juniors thing here, so I'm trying to tread carefully, but want to be inclusive.
I think the less tension we give to the small creature, the better,
Nice. Okay, good. So it's great to have you here, and great to have you here again. For everybody who's joining, Nabeel and Hamish were here last October. Am I getting this right? At least last fall. And we so appreciate you talking to us like this in this informal space. So tonight we're going to talk about this digital infrastructure plan again. And for everyone who's joining, the city has done a really good job putting presentations out. Nabeel just had a session, at 5 o'clock. Maybe you were all were there. I wasn't. There are plenty of materials out there to explain what the plan is. I've got it here. I'm reading it. It's great read. Can't recommend it enough. But tonight, the point is not to repeat those conversations. What I hope we could do was have a really, kind of informal conversation about this policy. So that's what we're going to do for the next 7.5 minutes. And I want to start that conversation by saying two things. One of them is back in 2018, 2019, smart city stuff was pretty full on in Toronto. And at that point in time, there was this sort of sentiment from a lot of us in the community of like, we need a policy for this. There's so much going on. What do? We need a policy. So that was sort of the beginning point. And as a lot of people know, the city has been a smart city for a very long time. This is not a new thing. There's been tech in the city for a long time, but that's the sort of the history. So now the second thing I wanted to say is the emotional roller coaster that I've been on, because this is the nature of tonight's conversation. I was like, we really need this policy. This was me in 2019. We really need it. Lots of us, we need it. And now in 2022, I'm like, is this policy a good idea? Maybe this is a bad idea. So I just want to say that out loud, because that is not, that's true. And that's not easy to deal with. And I think you three and many of your colleagues are dealing with that. So I just want to open on that emotional, like, I'm not even sure what we should be doing with this. So 2 questions. The first one is this. The last time you came to speak with us, we had a digital infrastructure plan. Now we have a digital infrastructure strategic framework. Would you let us know sort of how that change came to be and why? And it doesn't roll off the tongue as well, the diffs. I don't know who wants to start, but why is it not a plan and why is it a strategic framework now? What happened? Hamish, you want to go?
Sure, I'll go. All right. Thanks for the question and good evening. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. There's a couple of different ways we can answer it, and I'll start off. So as you know, we did a whole round of consultations, both internal to the city and external with the public and other stakeholders. Interestingly, we found, and by the way, I'll put a link into the chat. You can access the consultation report online if you're interested. We heard more so from internal people that we spoke with than external, a lot of confusion around what we meant by a plan. There was sort of, I guess the terminology was creating expectations and maybe sort of excitement that the plan was going to outline what sort of technology was going to be rolled out in the next X amount of years, to what areas geographically, what resources were going to be assigned to it, in that sort of a plan sense. And so we were continually having to start these conversations, tell them what the plan is, and then what the plan is not. And then that led us, because it was continually, we were trying to massage our messaging with additional slides and bullets and revisiting images and that sort of thing. So we thought, well, if the word plan is creating confusion, let's think about rephrasing it or reframing it as a framework. So that was really the start of how it sort of evolved into what it is as a framework. But it was also a function of, and I'll maybe let Nabeel sort of build off this point, but the plan, as you know, as it was written, was quite rigid. It had policy statements that said the city will do this, this, and this. It was all about compliance. And we wanted to sort of pull back intentionally and deliberately from that to allow for more flexibility and to move away from that rigidity. And so I'll just sort of put that as like the base layer, and
okay,
maybe
perfect. So
people on the team. Yeah.
That's great. And I just want to say to everybody here, like trying to define what is tech in the city, right? Like in these documents and in this process, you're able to start to map its hardware, its software, it's this. And of course, there's a long history of lots of people being in charge of those things all over the place, right? So to those of us who don't, when we hear a plan, I know my immediate next question when I saw that plan was like, how are you implementing this plan? Now, now what's the next thing? And Nabeel, maybe this is to you, this was the second question. When we look at this plan, and as everyone here will see, it's pretty extensive. It doesn't have a budget associated with it. It doesn't really have directions. And I think what we wanted to talk about tonight informally is it's kind of like our plan in a way, like not Civic Tech's, I mean, the public's plan, like here's a thing, and it's kind of up to us as to how this will get implemented, and it's, at least partially. But I think the thing, Nabeel, that people don't see from outside the city is the cultural shift that this kind of a framework or plan is actually asking for. Could you speak within what's comfortable there? I'm not asking you to, throw colleagues under the bus, but like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who aren't super keen on the public having more control. I'm putting words in your mouth, but can you riff a bit on that? Because that's the thing we don't see.
Answering the question in the question. Sorry, I'm just teasing. Anyway, again, hi everyone, thank you. Glad to be here. And I want to I can pick up actually from where Hamish left off and also begin to answer your question, Bianca. It's so funny because, you said defining tech. Earlier today, we had a conversation about defining partnership, and people were like, what does partnership mean? And we're like, we think it's pretty simple. We're like, no, partnership means a certain specific thing. But no, anyway, it can get quite, I think there is, and I really appreciate some of the feedback that we got, from people who told us, listen, if you say, for instance, I'll give you an example. If you say the city will do X, Y, Z as it relates to open source, then in what way does that tie their hands in the future, right? What kinds of doors does it open, but what kinds of doors does it also close, right? Which is, I think, a really valid point, right? And that's part of the reason why we said, okay, it's a framework for making decisions and will result in future policies, procedures, guidelines that need to be updated. It's evolving, right? And because it's evolving, I think, to get to your question, a lot of the people internally as well have asked the same question: how is it going to implement it? Are you expecting me to do this? And what are you exactly asking of me? Which is, again, a very fair question. And, given that I am not someone who, for instance, has been working for, sorry, Sami, I'm just meaning, sorry. So given that, we don't know the answers to all those questions immediately. And as a result, we don't want to be in a position where people feel like, we're setting rules for them. Rather, the approach that we're trying to take is, again, reassuring people, communicating that this is the direction that we'd like to go in. Here's the vision. Here's, an outcome that we'd like to achieve. And we want to discuss with you and work with you to figure out how we'll get there. And I think this is the kind of sentiment that I'm bringing to the community as well, because it's not just working with internal staff, it's also working with the community to figure out, how do you think we should get there? Anyway,
yeah, and I've got 30, I just paused this, because there's 30 seconds left before we open it up to others. And So thank you both for starting the conversation this way. And I just want to say some of us here tonight have worked with open data, and Gil Penalosa is here. Yeah, he had a question about data, which we should get into a bit. One of the big failures within the open data world a decade ago was, oh, this sounds so great. But no, it was always volunteer work for staff in government. It was not, like, there was a small team, sure, but then you were asking a whole bunch of other people to do more work without it being formally part of their job or it being budgeted. So I just want to say, I hope we're all learning together in community that, writing a lot of stuff and then not having accountability or money put toward it it's a setup for trouble, right? So I think we need to be honest about the fact that this isn't a budgeted situation. It's a lot of collaborative kind of stuff, so some of it reminds me of open data, and I hope we can not replicate some of the open data history in this framework. So I'm going to stop there. That's how fast 10 minutes goes. I would love to hear questions from people, and like I said, there's so much information available online about what this plan is. It has different principles, it has different objectives, and there's a lot of detail out there. But tonight we really wanted to try to keep it less about documents you can access and more about like hard stuff that, open government, and trying to have a bit of a harder conversation in this room if we can. So I'm gonna sort of hand it back. I'm happy to try to manage the questions as they come in. Okay, so hang on. I have until 7:50 for this discussion. Cool, we have more time, yay. Good, because I know you even had more things to say. So let's split the difference and we'll stop talking at 7:40 and then we have 20 minutes for community conversation. Cool? Is that good with everybody? Okay, so I'm gonna put the timer back on. Picking up on that point about open government, I just want to share with everybody who's in this room, one of the reasons I'm excited about this plan is that it helps us learn about how tech is in the budget, operated, how, like, which divisions are in charge of what, like, it's all over the place. And hopefully, I'm going to go macro for a minute here. We're all struggling in this democracy moment of like, what's going on? What do we do? How do we defend public institutions? What's real? What's not? Like, there's a lot of chaos in the world. And I just want all of us as a community to sort of understand that this creates like a new interface for us to try to get into the public institution, So even though this isn't a budgeted framework, it helps us see, and hopefully we can sort of agitate, in terms of how all the things the city does are delivered. So I see this very much as an opportunity for that. And I don't know, Alice, if that anything to riff on there, but it's going to be a long work here is the point, right? Like, this is something that's going to take us a long time for it to really materialize.
I agree with that completely. Thanks everybody for having us. Nice to see you. Some of those of you who haven't seen for a while. So I wanted to talk about like the budgeting piece, and in 2019 when we came, when council directors would do this work, we didn't have a smart city team, so to speak, at the City of Toronto. We had one person who was working on some policies, but now we have 10 people on the team focused on making this digital infrastructure strategic framework happen, and like projects under it happen, like Connect-TO and things like that. So we talk about, like, I know that there's not a dollars ask in per se, but the city, I want to sort of point to the fact that, and I don't want to sound defensive at all, but we are putting resources towards this work because we do believe in how important it is to make it happen. And so in terms of how it's going to sort of go into the day-to-day, obviously there's already lots of different processes and that we can tweak and we can change, but you're right, there's going to be a lot of different situations that will come up that's going to require more resources, it's going to require more budget. And so that's going to be that's something we have to bring to council when that time comes. And I hope that with community support, with the right minds at the table, that those things go smoothly in a way that benefits everybody. Like I know it sounds like bureaucratic talk, but that's how we get money, right? We go to committee, we're like, can we have money, please? And then we get to do the work, right? So yeah, I just wanted to talk about.
No, it's perfect. It's not defensive. It's like, that is money. That's money in the budget is staff, right? And I'd say a lot of your work to make this plan, would you describe it as going between a whole bunch of other people internally? Like, were you just doing a lot of going to different staff, different parts of the city, whether it's Parks and Rec or whether it's Toronto Community Housing, or whether it's the police, or like, I know that housing and the police are agencies, boards, and commissions. It doesn't fall, but I hope you understand what I'm getting at here is like, what did this look like to do? What were you doing? Like, how did you do it? How did you make it together?
So I think it kind of goes back to the question, like, why did it go from this plan to this strategic framework, right? Because we were asked to, like, by council to say, hey, develop this citywide digital infrastructure policy framework and governance model. That was the language in, like, this was in response to Quayside too, right? They were like, come up with something. We need something. What is our plan? And so we did that. We had the working principles and vision statements go to council after the first round of consultations in early 2020, like right before the pandemic. That was end of January. And then we built this piece of, citywide framework that we thought was answering, the community request, and we thought were answering the questions that we were asked. And I like to joke, like, and I'm new to technology, right? But most of my experiences in municipal government in other areas. And I like to joke, like, now I know what it's like to be a developer, because I got the requirements and I did the thing. But then, like, people are like, what is this? I don't get it. Is it a plan? Is it not a plan? How do I use it? I don't understand. And I was like, now I get it. Anyway.
User testing. This is like user testing.
Exactly. Now we're like, oh, like user like, what do you think, Civic Tech? Yeah, so we're there now. So it was a lot of great, like, we brought for the team can speak to this more, but it's a lot of iterations of coming up with policy, talking to people about it. What do you think about it? And we did talk to both Toronto Police and Toronto Community Housing for sure, right? We talked to many people. We really want people to talk to us. Like, we had the session this afternoon, and then we try to balance all the different interests and what we're hearing to come up with something that will work in our context. And a lot of it is also like I'm doing this motion. Somebody said talk about swimming earlier, but it's like, oh, like, this department is sharing data with this department this way. What does that mean? Is that something we can use there? Oh, like, they're doing this thing with the province. What does that mean? Can we, or like, not to pick on anybody, but maybe our colleagues in Mississauga, they have a great smart city strategy, like, how can we learn from what they're doing? Things like that. So anyway, that's my feeling, but Nabeel's got his hand.
No, but it's like that connective tissue between work, because this kind of policy isn't that common yet. Like, I'm hearing different strategies, different cities doing different things. So I've got one last thing, and Nabeel, I hope you can work your answer into this question, because I really love to open it up. Which is, like, for me, one of the things that we do as organizers and activists out in the world, everybody doing different things, working on housing or working on, having a good climate plan for the city, like, it's all connected, and technology is woven through so much of this, right? And I think the reason the budget feels important is because sometimes what you've seen, and I think from communities, and there's so much hesitation, is like, we don't want this, right? But the things that we want instead, and this is very abolitionist thinking, right? It's like, we don't want to fund this stuff. This is not what we want to do as a city or as a democracy. This is the stuff that we want to see. That work to the what do we want instead will probably require expenditure, right? Because I just want to share with you, and Nabeel, I hope maybe you could speak to this. When I look at things like how there's a strategy at the city to try to centralize IT, there's a cloud strategy, like, there's a lots of enterprise software. Like, you don't go from that to a lot of the things that I think this framework looks at in any short run, So I kind of want to say that too. That's why we think this is long work, and also why there will have to be some investments. So Nabeel, I know that's a different thing, but hopefully you can remember your old thought if you want to speak to that too, because that's where we see our, it's the what do we want instead part that looks very different than I think what the city is now. And I think lots of cities are going through that. Nabeel, and then for everybody who's here, please, like, if you've got questions, please bring them into the chat. I'm going to review them. Okay, Nabeel.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm trying to think about where to begin. one of the things that I've learned, and I'm relatively new to this, right? Hamish and Alice have been there for a long time, and many of the people on the call have worked in municipal government for a long time, have been public servants or are public servants. And I'm just sharing one of the things that I've learned is that, and this is, I'm responding to the earlier question first, is what does this look like? Is like talking to a lot of people. We've probably presented, so like today we presented on the DIP, but internally we've probably done 50 more presentations, with teams, week after week after week. And even then, I am firmly of the belief that we haven't spoken to all the people that we need to speak to yet. And we need to speak to a lot more people, right? And even internally, even on something that you might think is, that maybe I might think is like, oh, this is coordinated. It's not necessarily always the case. So for example, when you think of housing, now I think, are you thinking of TCHC or are you thinking of Shelter and Supporting Housing Administration? Because they're both different and they don't necessarily, they're not as interlinked as you might hope or expect necessarily, right? And I'm just being real here, right? So I think there's a lot of kind of continuous work to be done. And I think this speaks to the second part of what you were saying. There's long work. And in a way, the work that you think about, that you mentioned around standardizing IT, enterprise software, cloud strategy, is not actually disconnected from the DISF that you see. It's just a different facet of it. But it's so, let me try and make a connection right now on the fly. Everyone can see how new I am to this game. Cloud strategy raises the question of where is data stored? Where is data stored raises the question of data residency. And the data residency question is something that we're trying to tackle through the DISF, but it's also something that an internal team is separately working on. So that's the kind of ongoing, I think, dance that we're doing between different strategies. I think it's also like connecting different strategies, like how does the poverty reduction strategy and the data for equity strategy connect to the data governance guidelines in our group? Those are all things that I think we are trying to weave together. And yes, this is long work. I don't know if that was a very eloquent answer, but
no, it's good because there's so much, right? And there's so much from before.
Sorry, I don't, maybe you cut off. Like, yes, there is a lot of, there are lots of layers to this work, right? I mean, again, I'll give you another example. Council also said do data governance. And, there are currently at least 2 different projects related to data governance that our team is working on, more that others are working on. And, Alice sent me something like 10 emails a few months ago saying, here's all the history, and we're, even when we think about the DISF, right? This is not the city's first rodeo at trying to come up with a smart city master plan or a strategic framework, or, but we're hoping that this is one that, this is not something that is purely the result of a small working group, and I don't mean to dismiss that work, right? This builds on top of each other, right? Yeah. We learn from all the work that has been done in the past and trying to build on top of that. And looking at the work that others like, Steve and others are doing, so helpful. Sorry, I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm gonna do rapid fire questions, okay? This first one, Nabeel's still talking, but maybe this is my connection. Or you're not talking to me, good. All right, got it, yeah?
I think there's a bit of a lag. I
okay, cool, yeah. Thank you. This is a yes, no question. Do you have an update on the artificial intelligence register that was to be published by the city? The answer can totally be no. If it's no, no. See, look, yeah, it can happen.
We don't have an update. We have work done. City of Toronto has a great program called the Urban Fellow program, and we were lucky enough to get I know it sounds really cool too, Urban Fellow. We had an Urban Fellow work on this for the last 6 months. We have a website ready. We have 2 use cases ready, but we haven't published it yet, and we are going to.
There we go. Okay, got an excited audience for it. That's good. Okay, next one. Interested in moving from public sector control to community empowerment.
That's a yes or no question?
No, now we got a lag. Let me turn my video off. Hold on. Okay. Are we all caught up with each other? Am I on time?
I think so.
Good stuff. Okay. So interested in moving from public sector control to community empowerment, right? This is part of what open government is about. How can you give us advice as a community how to move forward with that? Like, because that's, I think this is right now, people are really into the commons, moving from, you know, capitalist ownership to stewardship. How do we share control of infrastructure? Any advice for us to advocate for these things from outside?
Again, it's not a yes, no, maybe I'll start and, you know, again, share thoughts, but I you know, empowerment can mean different things, but I think it's the most direct avenue that residents have is through council. And I think that's where, so I mean, as part of the DISF, we're trying to implement things like a public advisory body that will provide advice on digital infrastructure, being more open and transparent about it. And, you know, if you have more information about it, hopefully you can ask more questions and get more involved. Those are some of the things, but I think, and I really sincerely think and hope that those will move the dial, but I think at the same time that our local democratic institutions and processes are essential, and still there's a lot that we can do with them. They're not perfect, I think, but I think they're mechanisms that exist. I don't know if that's a great answer.
It's great because it's go to your elected official. It's a really good answer, and it's a direct answer. And I think this is what we as a community need to always be building education so that people know how to do that. Because really, you're not going to give power away. That's very ahistorical to think anybody gives their power away. So I think we have to all realize that if we want more involvement in this stewardship, we got to go ask for it and make a good case for it. And I was hoping, you know, maybe can you speak a little more to the sort of cultural challenges that we have right now with shifting to more community control? Like, is there anything more specific you can help us understand as to, like, is this city kind of fragmented? Like, people have the things they're in charge of, then they don't want other people telling them what to do, and they're sort of these are some of my assumptions. Is that any nodding? I'm putting you, this is not really fair. I'm putting you in a hot seat here.
I mean,
but if there's anything you can say about that, because we can't see it, you know, it's like we're sitting out here being like, what is going on? This is a plan. There's no thing. It's not changing. Like, we're going to have to deal with that because you're not able to. We have to help from outside. So anything you can share on the cultural piece of why this is so hard, because you live this in the weeds every single day. Some of us never even think about the city for months, right? You have to remember where we are and looking at you. Is there anything you can share about the culture of trying to deal with this power shift? That anything that you can share with us that, again, is comfortable? I'm going to go look at other questions. And if it isn't, no problem.
Yeah, I think a big part of it, to answer the question, comes down to risk and the city being generally risk adverse, particularly some divisions. You know, I won't name them necessarily, but there has been a lot of, like, a heavy lift to sort of take them along the journey we've been on and get them on, try to get them on side. In some cases, you know, we're still on that journey, and that can come from a number of.
Is this like Phoenix at the federal government, where like one thing goes kind of loud and publicly wrong and everyone's freaking out? Like, is that a thing there? Because I assume people operate a bit in a climate of fear of error. Is that, like, when you say risk, is that what you mean? Like, not screwing up?
Oh, no, I think I was maybe thinking about it in relation to, for example, the previous question. So when risk in relation to change, that's scary for people. And we're introducing a significant change to established processes that people are familiar with, they're comfortable with, they know how they fit into it, they know what their roles are. And so anything that disrupts that creates fear and uncertainty. Yeah.
Can I ask one? That makes sense. And I think that's a common one, right? And then I'm going to go to a question. Pat, when I see your hand up, and I'm going to scroll. If every time I've touched something, I've closed my browser, which is making me laugh. So there's fear and risk, but then when it's like economic development time, it's let's disrupt, baby. Like, let's go, let's try this. Like, let's try that. Let's do this, right? Like this for me, just so you all know, is a difficult tension to watch, because on one hand, it's like, we can't change. Oh, but hold on, when the private sector wants to change, let's do it, right? Like, I just want to share that sentiment that those things don't line up well. And I think that's just it's more, that was more a comment than a question. PatCon, there's one question left. And I'm sharing this because there is a natural tension here. The city wants to support the tech industry. It wants to do new things. It understands that as like, that looks like success for some of the people working there. But it is at odds with some of the values in this framework. So PatCon, you want to go and close this out? I'm sorry I'm not in the chat, but I've collapsed my Zoom 3 times. So PatCon, you want to go?
Cool. Yeah, thanks. I guess I was just wondering, you mentioned earlier, and this is, again, yeah, I think it's implicitly, you can pass on these questions or not. There's certainly friendly questions to understand. But you mentioned kind of the fellow is working on this thing, and they're just getting ready to release, and I guess the work, I guess I'm curious whether, because I know in the other divisions, there's the idea of working openly and showing the process is probably scary, but you guys are building a plan, you're all building a plan that's trying to convince others to open the process. So is there were there reasons that the process of even making that deliverable couldn't be kind of more transparent and open? I'm just nothing spacey, just an open Google Doc, and just there's comment mode there. And if any crazy people want to look in at the things happening, I guess I'm curious what the specific risk even on your own team is for working openly on the artifact where you're trying to convince people to work openly.
Yeah, thanks. Our some of the things we tried in working openly is drop-in sessions. Earlier today, we did drop-in sessions last fall as well, to hey, we're going to work on these 2 principles today. Come in, let's just talk about it and talk about what you think about it, talk about what we think about it. And that's what, working openly. On the other hand, technically, Google Docs are not a city product that we use. So it's difficult for us to use that because it is not an enterprise product that the city is using. So that already is a conflict. I can I can see how that might sound to the group, but that's one of the reasons.
Alice, yes, Alice, and I think what's really important for the group to hear, and then I know we got to wrap. I'm watching if it's 7. I know we got to wrap up here. Steve, you've been super patient, so if your question's really quick. I also want to remind people, governments have to archive documentation. So when is your snapshot, right? These are the things that we don't realize, that at what do you have to do? Keep 900 versions of the document all day long for records? Those are legal requirements. So this ways of working is challenging. Is it okay if Steve goes really quickly? Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So it's not so much a question, it's more of a comment. Am I able to make a comment? It's in regards to Bianca, it's in regards to your comment about open data being only a part of people's jobs. So very quickly, I just want to say that I co-chair the Public Sector Open Data Group, PSOD, with Yuri from Good. Recently, we did a survey of municipalities across Ontario, and the number of staff fully committed to open data is actually very low, just like you say. Part of the difficulty is that, 1, the sheer volume of data is very high. 2, the method of publishing is rather manual. And then 3, there's a lack of data governance. But there is potential for this. So the good news is there's something called open data at scale. And this is transformational, and it will change all governments right across Canada. So it would start with something like an open data policy, particularly open by default. Some municipalities already have this, like Toronto and Mississauga and so on. A data classification policy, so things like public, protected A, protected B, protected C type of thing. Data classification itself, so using tools like Azure Purview or things of that nature. Pulling all data through a unified data platform so that it can be shared through an API safely on your open data platforms. Do it once and you're done, and that's it. So there's great potential for open data at cities. It just involves investment in making that happen.
Cool.
So I'll just.
No, that's great. And thanks for these details. And I think that's a really good place to wrap, because it feels like, you know, the data, the software, the infrastructure, like how do we keep all of these things moving at the same time? And I'll end by saying, as a little bit of a open data, you know, look back on 10 years, is we also need to ask ourselves, how much more data do we need to do the things we need to do in the city, right? Because there's one comment in this document, to end on a critical, but I hope productive note, which is like, technology and data makes the city work better. And I'm like, does it though? Like, do we know this? You know, because I think there's never going to be a shortage of supply, whether it's data, server, whatever. We're going to be pushed. And I think it would be fun for us to think about, how do we make sure that those statements are actually true? And I think that's where, like, just to bring us to close on the end, Gil Penalosa is here and has done tons of work on like making streets safe for people 8 to 80 years old. If you're 80, if you're happy on the street, you're good. That's a metric that we're not going to catch in our tech accountability, but that should be our priority, right? So how do we do this organizing between different communities, using data maybe as a tool for that, but not that. I think we need to be honest about how much are we getting returns on what we have, and maybe some of these things we need to divest, and some of these things we need to invest in, right? So I'm going to stop there. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for putting up with a lot of our comments, not question stuff. It's what happens when we're all super into it. And I hope we can keep having conversations like this. I just really, really appreciate your willingness to you know, come out and have a talk like this. And I want to say to everybody in this room, usually talking to people who represent governments is so painful, and it's almost not worth it, because it's like a giant comms exercise where no one can really say anything. So it is not minimal and not anything small that, you know, that you three are here tonight in this capacity, and we're really honest about hard things. So thank you. Okay, I'll stop talking. Thank you so much.
That's